Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington. Let's get to it. The Senate will return Monday and stay in session until Thursday. The House will return Wednesday and stay in session through Friday. This week in the House will actually return Tuesday, but they won't vote until Wednesday. When the House begins voting, it is scheduled to consider 15 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday and for the balance of the week, the House will consider 4 bills pursuant to a rule. They are H.R. 7726, the Stop Child Care Scams Act of 2026, H.R. 8872, the Preventing Waste, Fraud, and Abuse in TANF Act, H.R. 8646, the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and Related Agency Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2027, and H.R. 7892, the No Aid for Ghost Students Act of 2026. There are 2 other bills that may be considered. They are H.Con. Res. 86, directing the President, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution, to remove the United States Armed Forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and H.Con. Res. 84, directing the President, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution, to remove United States Armed Forces from Lebanon. And then there's the Democrat discharge petition, H. Res. 518, providing for consideration of the bill, that is H.R. 2913, to authorize support for Ukraine and for other purposes. This week in the Senate will return Monday, today, with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on a motion to end debate on the nomination of Kathleen S. Lane to serve as a United States District Judge for the District of Montana. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll also see a vote on the nomination of Jeffrey M. Kuhlman to serve as a United States District Judge for the District of Kansas. And at some point, likely Wednesday, if they can get some things wrapped up first, the Senate will move into debate and vote-a-rama on the Department of Homeland Security Funding Reconciliation Bill, about which we will talk more in a moment. But first, let's talk about FISA Section 702 reauthorization. 1 week from Friday, the authorization for Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, expires. Section 702 is that part of the law that allows the U.S. intelligence community, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to conduct targeted, warrantless surveillance on foreign nationals located outside the United States. Note those 2 preconditions. The target must be a foreign national, and he or she must be located outside the United States. And, of course, they must be believed to have foreign intelligence information, such as information on terrorism, espionage, or weapons proliferation. Because modern communications run through U.S. networks, the law allows the intelligence community to compel companies like Google, Verizon, and AT&T to hand over digital communications. The government does not need an individual warrant to target these foreigners, but must follow broad procedures approved annually by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. The problem occurs because from time to time, the interception and collection of a targeted foreigner's communications, his phone calls, text messages, emails, etc., reveals that the targeted foreigner is in contact with an American citizen located inside the United States. U.S. citizens located inside the United States is the exact opposite of foreigners located outside the United States. So there is no automatic approval for reading the U.S. citizens' communications. The law says the intelligence community, the law says the intelligence can be collected, but it doesn't say anything about reading it. Civil liberties groups have been opposing the use of Section 702 to allow what they call backdoor searches of U.S. citizens' communications for years. And there are enough of them in the House of Representatives to form a majority that refuses to extend the authorization for Section 702 without significant reforms. That's why the reauthorization hasn't happened yet. Virtually all the Democrats and a significant minority of the Republicans have voted against reauthorization so far. Before the House and Senate took their Memorial Day recess, the House was able to pass a 3-year extension of the authorization, but only by wooing the votes of hardline conservatives by adding to the bill a prohibition on a central bank digital currency, also known as a CBDC. That provision does not enjoy majority support in the United States Senate, though, so passage of the House-passed bill is unlikely in the Senate. Senior leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Republican chairman, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, and the Democrat vice chairman, Mark Warner of Virginia, have been working on a compromise. The two are reported to be close enough to a final compromise that they may announce an agreement as early as today. The agreement builds off the House-passed 3-year extension, but drops the prohibition against a CBDC. Further, it narrows the definition of an electronic communications provider. Stay tuned. We're likely going to see action on the legislative front maybe as early as this week in the Senate. Now back to DHS funding and Reconciliation 2.0. Now let's talk about immigration enforcement funding, which was supposed to be enacted via the reconciliation process before today. The House and Senate have both passed a budget resolution tasking the Judiciary Committee and the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee with drafting legislation to spend $72 billion over the next 3 years on immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection. The two Senate committees have done their job, and the Senate Budget Committee has melded the two pieces of legislation into one. The Senate leadership was planning and on track to bring the bill to the floor 2 weeks ago before they went on recess. And then the Justice Department announced the settlement of the $10 billion lawsuit brought by President Trump against the Internal Revenue Service for the leak of his personal and company tax returns several years ago, for which an IRS contractor was prosecuted and convicted and is now serving a prison sentence. According to the terms of the agreement, which was not sanctioned by any court, the government would create what the agreement calls an anti-weaponization fund of $1,776 million, that is 1776, to be distributed to people not named Trump who can show they were wrongly targeted by the federal government. The fund would be managed by a committee of 5 persons, 4 of whom would be selected by the Attorney General alone, and the 5th of whom would be selected by the Attorney General in consultation with congressional leaders. In addition, the agreement contains an addendum that was released the following day. The addendum states that the IRS is, quote, forever barred and precluded, end quote, from, quote, prosecuting or pursuing, end quote, examinations, audits, reviews, investigations, or other enforcement actions against President Trump, certain family members, and affiliated businesses with respect to matters that were pending before the IRS as of the settlement date. Congressional Democrats and the dominant media howled. But I repeat myself. The key, of course, would be the reaction of Senate Republicans. And given that 2 of them had been targeted for defeat by President Trump in their re-election bids, and 2 of them had gone down to defeat at the hands of Trump-endorsed challengers, feelings inside the Senate Republican conference were a little raw, not too charitable toward the White House. The announcement of the addendum literally came on the same day Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn was being wiped out by his Trump-backed challenger. Against this turmoil inside the Senate Republican conference, Democrats plotted amendments to the reconciliation bill, and it appeared likely that many of them could be considered under a simple 50-vote threshold because they were directly tied to matters considered by the Judiciary Committee, which had been tasked to write legislation for the reconciliation bill. That makes it germane. All the Democrats would need is to have 4 Senate Republicans cross the aisle on any given amendment vote to achieve a majority. Majority Leader Thune was forced to pull the bill and instead send his members home early without voting. So now they come back, and they still have to vote on the reconciliation bill because ICE and CBP are still without funding. And that's the whole point of this exercise, after all. Senate Republicans are hoping the White House will announce adjustments to the way the anti-weaponization fund will work. Perhaps they could announce that no one convicted of assaulting a police officer on January 6 would be eligible for payments from the fund. Or perhaps they could change the membership of the fund committee or change the qualifications for applying for a payment. But unless the White House announces it is terminating the anti-weaponization fund entirely, there will be Democrat amendments offered during the vote-a-rama, and they will likely get enough Republican votes to be attached to the bill. That means Majority Leader Thune will have to negotiate the terms of what's called a wraparound amendment. That's an amendment that comes at the very end of the vote-a-rama that can nullify some or all of the amendments that were attached earlier. Since it requires members who voted for the amendments to now vote for an amendment that nullifies their earlier vote for the amendment, it's a sensitive vote for anyone who voted for the earlier amendments. And that means it has to be negotiated with each senator individually. It works because the rules say that later amendments supersede earlier amendments. If Senator Smith offers an amendment at 1 a.m. that strikes funding for some program, and it passes, and Senator Jones then offers an amendment at 2 a.m. that restores the funding for the program and adds another $1 billion, and it passes, then Senator Jones's amendment controls and is the amendment that is added to the underlying bill. Now, back to the anti-weaponization fund. United States District Judge Kathleen M. Williams, she's the judge who was overseeing the case between the IRS and the Trump family, on Friday ordered lawyers for President Trump and his family to respond to what she called grievous allegations that the settlement between the Trump family and the IRS was itself an act of fraud. A group of retired federal judges had raised concerns about the fund's creation, claiming that Trump and the DOJ deceived the court by failing to disclose to the court the terms of the settlement agreement. They asked Williams to reopen the case, which had been dismissed because the two sides had come to an agreement. Elsewhere on Friday, federal district judge Leonie Brinkema, a Clinton appointee in Virginia, issued a restraining order to prevent any funds from being dispersed from the fund before the legal fight over its establishment had had a chance to play out. The order blocks any payment until at least June 12, when she has set a hearing to hear arguments in the matter. And that's our Washington report for this week. If you've got any questions or comments, please drop us a line at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question during the broadcast, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Washington Report. Same time, same channel. Until then, be well and be active.